morning. Thanks everybody for coming. Glad everybody could get together this morning to talk about a little bit of the problems that small businesses have been having over the last years. I want to thank the university and Dean Schaefer for allowing us to use the facilities here at the Gatton College of Business and University of Kentucky. I'd like to welcome everyone here today. I became the ranking member of the Small Business Committee this year, and in that role, our job is to advocate for small businesses across the country. And I think part of that is listening, to what kind of troubles that you guys have been having. We're acutely aware of the devastating impact that COVID lockdowns have had on small businesses and families. Instead of what was originally said 15 days to slow the virus, these lockdowns became protracted and on and on and on, and to some extent they still continue. Larger businesses were often deemed essential and got to escape the restrictions, but the small business community was told, do it or else, basically. Certain industries locked down completely, and this has caused sort of a ripple effect throughout supply chains. Washington's spending problem has also contributed to this, causing the cost of goods and supplies to skyrocket in some industries. While local officials continue to keep many of the large businesses open, schools throughout the country, including here in Kentucky, are still not fully operational. This has created many obstacles for working parents and families as they try to make ends meet. The science is clear, though, that children are at minimal risk for the disease and not super spreaders. In fact, when you look at transmission studies in several different countries, you find that the children aren't really spreading the disease. Most of the countries in Europe have kept their schools open throughout. Some of them closed down for a month or so last year and were back open by May and June and have been operating continuously. We've had some private schools in both the Lexington area and in Louisville area and in northern Kentucky and up in the Ashland area that were open throughout, never had any super spreading events, and had really no diagnosed illnesses at school. I've always asserted that these Orwellian lockdowns have severe consequences. We will experience the impact of these lockdowns on our economy and damage to our children for years to come. Now, as vaccine distribution and new therapeutics are widely available, it's imperative that we fully reopen. The question has now become, why are those in power continuing to assert control over people's livelihoods and our children's future? As I've said before, Florida is open, Texas is open, neighboring Tennessee has repealed their mandates. Even New York, the king of lockdowns in New York, even New York has set a firm date to reopen, and yet we still don't have a firm date in Kentucky to reopen. To make matters worse, in our state, the state legislature has said that these edicts from the governor should expire. They passed a law. Now the governor openly is defying that law, suing in court, saying he's not subject to the state legislature. This is a very, very dangerous sign when you have a governor that will resist the will of the popularly elected people. It's in court now, but this is very, very dangerous to our state and to the constitutional aspect of our state to have a governor that's acting beyond the authority of the state legislature and in defiance of the state legislature. I hope we get this sorted out very soon. I look forward to our discussion today on the challenges facing businesses and families. We have a stenographer here who will record all this. This will be made an official transcript of the committee, and hopefully people will learn from this and take to heart the different problems that each of you have had in your businesses. This is a great panel, and I think it'll be quite interesting to hear from each of you. I'm going to introduce one at a time, and I think what we'll do is
Dean Schaefer is going to, the dean of the school is going to say a few opening remarks.
okay. And actually, I've been told that Dean Schaefer would like to say a few words.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Simon Sheether, and I'm proud to say I'm the Dean of the Gatton College of Business and Economics here at the University of Kentucky. On behalf of the University of Kentucky, we welcome Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky to the university and to our magnificent facility here at the university. Senator Paul, we appreciate your leadership and your focus on Kentucky first. There's no better time to inspire creativity and entrepreneurship in our small business owners than now. We appreciate all the business leaders in attendance today, including Gatton alum Kaylin Query, the founder and president of Lexington Event Company, and Dawn Perkins, the General Manager of the Team Spirit Shop. I'm pleased to briefly report on the success of the Gatton College and the University of Kentucky in dealing with the pandemic. For example, in spring 2020, our college was able to move over 215 in-person course sections totaling 35,000 student credit hours to fully online in a matter of just 10 days in mid-semester. In fall 2020, we delivered courses in a number of different modes. 15% were completely in-person classes, 40% of our classes used technology to provide a highly interactive environment that mixed in-person and online. 30% of our classes were online with synchronous class meetings, and 15% of the classes were too large to offer in person or via Zoom and were done online asynchronously. I'm proud to report our faculty has done important research regarding COVID-19 that helped both on a local and a national level. A couple of highlights. One study showed how businesses should respond to the crisis with both speed and agility. As well as our economists studied the effectiveness of social distancing at the start of the pandemic. In February, the Gatton College hosted the 11th Annual Supply Chain Forum. With over 200 attendees, we brought together national calibre supply chain leaders who are practitioners, academics and consultants. The forum allowed businesses to share their supply chain initiatives, especially related to the theme of thriving in disruption. Last month, the college hosted a conference on business innovation and entrepreneurship. 3 Gatton College alumni who are now successful small business entrepreneurs spoke on the first day of the conference. On the second day of the conference, 22 teams pitched new business ideas. 12 undergraduates teams, 5 graduate teams and 5 non-profits. Over $20,000 in prize money was awarded. The graduate division winner is an engineering graduate student who had previously completed the Gatton College Entrepreneurs Boot Camp, something we offer every semester. Next weekend, I personally look forward to being part of 2 important commencement ceremonies for the Gatton College. It'll be great to have that back in person. Thank you for your attendance today. Over to you, Senator.
Thank you, Dean Sheether. I think what we'll do is, rather than do all the introductions at once, why don't we do introductions one by one and then hear from each individual after the introduction. So Alan Hinks, why don't we start with Alan first. Alan Hinks is the owner of Dundee Tavern in Louisville. Mr. Hinks has owned and operated Dundee Tavern for 6 years. He's worked in the hospitality industry for over 30 years, including a decade at Captain's Quarters, Riverside Grill, and O'Charlie's Restaurant and Bar. Mr. Hinks, why don't you start us off, and if you can limit your testimony to about 5 minutes.
Okay. I'm glad to be here, and thank you so much, Dr. Paul, for inviting me here to this event. Obviously, we've all had our horror stories when it came to the mandate starting back in March, and the tavern and myself, throughout the 3 decades I've been in this business, has always been employee-oriented. And when all this started, my whole goal was to make payroll. And we did everything we possibly could do to make payroll. And what was really challenging with us in the beginning was the decisions that were made by people, in my honest opinion, that never had to make payroll before, okay? And when everything came down the pike, the ways that everything was handled, not really following the science, not really asking for advice from fellow state leaders or basically the citizens of Kentucky, it was a time that we made a stance. And I'm currently involved in a lawsuit right now. We had a lawsuit last year against the governor of Kentucky about the mandates and about the handling of the COVID-19 in our state. And I'm just very, very honored to be here, and I'm proud of Kentucky. I'm a citizen of Kentucky. My son got his master's here at University of Kentucky. He's in the Air Force now, stationed in Wichita Falls, Texas, and I have 2 granddaughters. And I don't want my granddaughters to come in when it's their time around to experience what we've experienced in this past year and a half. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanks. And I think one of the points that's very important to hear from that testimony is I think there's a difference between advice, persuasion, suggestions, good ideas, and mandates. And one of the problems with mandates is one size fits all, is we're not all the same, and every restaurant's not the same, and every bar is not the same, and every retail outlet is not the same. And frankly, there's a difference in spread between rural communities and urban communities. And really in a free society, a lot of these decisions would be made by the individuals, not by the state. Let's go to Dawn Perkins next. Dawn is the general manager of Team Spirit Shop in Lexington and is a school reopening activist. She led Let Them Play Kentucky and Let Them Learn Kentucky. I like both of those, which advocate for starting youth sports and restarting in-person instructions. And I hope she'll tell us that you don't have to wear a mask when you're playing soccer. Dawn.
Hi, I'm Dawn Perkins. I am the general manager of the Team Spirit Shop, which is a company that's turned 25 years in November. And when the governor shut us down on March the 13th, it was like, oh my gosh, what's next? I'm not married. I don't have children. That was my husband. That was my baby. And that has been my life since I did graduate from the university. So like everyone else, with the first couple weeks, I was like, okay, we're fine. And then it quickly realized that a couple weeks were a month, and then 2 months, and then 3 months. But having a business that's based 98% on spirit wear and PTO and activities and organizations, I don't have to tell you that the last 14 months there's not been much of a business. I have a brother that runs on transport team for Cincinnati Children's, and I have a sister who's married to someone in the military, and elderly parents, which caused us all to be a little bit separated. But in August, one of my nephews had a birthday, and I was at home. And I was home, first of all, for a funeral on a Monday and didn't have the opportunity to really engage with them. But on that Wednesday, I was back home, and I could feel the mental stress and the tension of my own nieces and nephews. And I thought to myself, I've got to do something. On that particular Thursday is when the KHSAA was meeting, and I thought, after watching Julian Tacken and the Board of Controls, we're fine. That meeting ended at 3:30. We logged on to the governor at 4 o'clock, and I thought, we're not moving anywhere. And I wrestled that particular night, just, if mine feel this way, not mine personally, but my nieces and nephews, what about the other 80,000 that play sports and the other however many that are in public education, private education, daycares, whatever? They have to be feeling it. And on that Friday, I started a group called Let Them Play. And in 2.5 days, I found myself on the Capitol with 30,000 people in the group, and we were ready to go. And shortly after that, we did Let Them Learn. And that has been my focus. And I've had to put my business on the side because it's not been about the Team Spirit Shop, even though ultimately that is what my life is about. It's been about the academic, the mental, the physical, and the social well-being of the children of Kentucky. And sometimes we talk academically, but most of the time we don't want to mention the other things. And those are the things that won't be determined by a test score, and they will be years to come. So yes, I need to get my business up and running, and supply chains and employees and working is all factors. But right now, my primary focus is on the children of Kentucky, because they are the future of Kentucky, and they deserve better.
Well, we appreciate what you've done to try to get schools back open. I think one of the things that's alarming is there are now statistics showing thousands of children who never log on at all. So even children, we got them internet access, we got them a computer, and they're still not logging on at all. They're lost to the system. And so I think we're going to find hundreds, if not thousands, of kids, not only throughout Kentucky, but throughout the whole country that basically have lost a year, maybe a year and a half of education. This is a real problem. And I personally believe that education is sort of that equalizing force. No matter what your background came from, where you were on the socioeconomic ladder, it's your chance to get ahead if you can get an education. It's incredibly important. And I think we've lost that. And it'd be one thing if we were looking at smallpox and a third of our children were dying. You would think that with the hype over this, but for kids, it's important to say, and it's absolutely incontrovertibly true, that this disease is less dangerous than the seasonal flu for children. Now it's the opposite. Above 65, it's probably 1,000 times more dangerous than the seasonal flu. So we should be just honest. But we decided one size fits all, and they were going to treat our 5 and 10 and 15-year-old kids the same way we're going to treat our 85-year-old parents. And that just made no sense at all. No science to talk about it. No evidence of spread in the schools. Typically in the past, you remember when we'd get the flu, and the flu can be deadly for children, we'd close the school down for a couple weeks when we'd get 10 or 15 cases, when we had an outbreak. We closed every school in Kentucky and every school in the entire country without an outbreak. I know of no outbreak where 10 or 15 kids got COVID in a school. They haven't been reported because no kids went to school. All schools were closed. And so I don't think we did really base this on the science. With regard to athletics, there was a story the other day of a track coach in New Hampshire fired for not making his kids wear the mask while running outside. So it's submit to my will or be fired, not my will, to the state's will or be fired. And I think the burden should be on the state to prove that a mask outside is necessary. Now they've finally admitted after a year and a half that you probably don't need a mask outside. And yet people are still wearing them and enforcing it. And people are yelling down, the Karens of this world are yelling down at people. There was a teacher I think it was in Virginia, this was probably 6 months ago, yelled at 2 14-year-old boys who were grappling on a playground, wrestling and, playing a little tackle football or whatever. You're committing genocide. And she started yelling profanities at them. She was a school teacher in the public school system, and she's yelling profanities at this 14-year-old. Not based on any science, based on sort of opinions and conjecture. And so, by all means, we need to look at the science on this. There's a great deal of evidence because Europe went right back in. They also kept moving the goalpost on us. They said, well, we're going to flatten the curve. I remember we were going to flatten the curve. That sounded somewhat reasonable. You're going to close your shop. We're going to close all this for about 3 or 4 weeks so we don't overwhelm the hospitals. We did that. And then we did it for another 3 weeks. And then it went on and on and on. And if you look at the curve of the incidence of the disease and the mandates, there's long timeline curves over the last year or so. After every mandate, there's no evidence that the mandate does anything to the trajectory. In fact, we had the most mandates on in December when we hit the highest peak of all. So I think the virus pretty much had a mind of its own and did what it wanted, no matter what we did, other than the vaccine. And so when people say, which I think is malpractice, that wearing the vaccine is just as good as the vaccine, wearing a mask is somehow just as good as the vaccine, it's a lie. The vaccine does work, and people should be encouraged to get the vaccine, encouraged, and do it of their own free will, but it has made a difference. The one other thing that they've forgotten also is that about a third of the public has been vaccinated, but a third of the public has gotten the disease naturally. And they do work in tandem. They both have immunity, and that combined immunity is causing the curves to come dramatically down. But don't get me started. All right, Adam Hinton. Adam Hinton is the vice president of Hinton Mills, a group of 5 retail farm supply stores and feed mills based in eastern Kentucky. The family-owned business is headquartered in Flemingsburg, Kentucky. He also serves as a director of Kentucky Welding Institute, a private welding school that trains students from across the U.S. Mr. Hinton and his wife, Melissa, own the Hinton Agency, which specializes in group life and health benefits. Adam?
Thanks for having us. I appreciate having an ear for small business. I have a hard time talking about our business without talking about our origin. We've been in business for 103 years. My great-grandfather started the business as he was an orphan at the age of 6, and by the age of 12, he had started his first business raising baby calves probably from his neighbor, and took that money over the course of the next handful of years, and in 1918 started our business. Our business has not only served Fleming County, but we now have 5 locations, so we serve a good portion of northeastern Kentucky. So folks that don't understand what a farm supply store is, basically, if you ate today, that's because of a farmer somewhere that has grown food. And here in rural Kentucky, there's a lot of farmers, and our businesses like ours serve those farmers with feed, seed, fertilizer, fencing materials, things of that nature. Because of that, we were deemed essential. So both at Hinton Mills, and I'll speak to Kentucky Welding Institute in a moment, we were both deemed essential industries. And like Alan had mentioned earlier, one of our biggest concerns is, number one, is how do we take care of our employees? We've had employees that have stayed with us in some cases 50 years, have several right now that have been with us 40 years, and more than that have been with us 30 some years. So how do we take care of those employees, and how do we serve our customers? You know, one of our slogans on almost anything that you'll see internally or with our employees, it says, work hard, be kind, serve others. So we have to think about that, and we're not medical doctors, so we had to take the advice of whether it's local health department or others, and try to follow those guidelines and stay open. It has been a challenge. The biggest challenge has been for us is trying to know what to do and who to listen to, number one. I think number two has been labor. We had folks that were apprehensive, like probably all of us in this room when the pandemic started. Had 3 folks retire, and normally we have a workforce amongst our locations of just over 60 full-time employees, and right now we're at 53. So we've got 7 positions that we've been unable to fill as those positions were vacated. Just because they're either because of fear, or now because of the benefits of staying home, that the financial benefits for folks are greater because of some of the government subsidies, as opposed to finding jobs in Hinton Mills or places like us. One of our other big concerns right now is supply chain. One of our managers, we've got 5 location managers, they're all like family to us, and one of those managers called me 6:45 last week, and he said, it's not unusual for him to call me that early, but he was just, I'm kind of depressed. And this is our most upbeat guy. He's the leader amongst leaders. He's the guy outside of our owners who's number one in charge of our business. And he said, I asked him what was going on. He said, it's really hard for us. We've built our business over the years on serving customers, and we have customers that come in, and when we tell them what the price is, if we have the product, or how long it'll take us to get them that product, how upset, that oftentimes it makes them. And he said, I've prided myself on always being able to take care of others, serve local farmers, and we're not able to do that to the best of our ability. And I think a lot of that has to do, and I'm sure we'll get into that later, with some of the government money that's out there that discourages folks from working or producing products that we all buy. The welding school, Kentucky Welding Institute, we've been in business for just over 6 years, and we've had students from 40-some states, so we've turned into not just a small welding institute, but a larger welding institute right here in Kentucky. Because we are training folks for critical infrastructure, we were able to stay open. We went from running 3 shifts, we were going 3 shifts to meet demand. We were going 24 hours a day, 3 shifts of students in March of last year, and by May of last year we were down to 12 students in 1 shift. Fortunately right now we're much closer to our normal number, which is about 80 on 2 shifts, and look forward to getting back to 3 shifts soon. So it's been a challenge. Again, the biggest thing for us has been trying to know who to listen to, trying to make sure that we have workforce. We've had 2 piers that have had to close because the local health departments have closed them for some periods of time to quarantine employees, and then a third competitor of ours who last week had a sign on their door that said that they'd be closed until further notice because they didn't have enough employees to run their business. So with that said, thank you again for being here and listening to those of us in small business.
Well, Adam, when your manager called you at 6:45, since you're a farmer, you'd already been up an hour and a half, right? So you mentioned the essential industries, and I think, sometimes we did it with some intelligence. Obviously, food is essential, farming is essential. But there were many people that were affected in a way where they had a small business that was a small retail outlet that competed with a big one like Walmart.
Right.
So Walmart became essential and mom and pop's retail was not essential, particularly in small town America. And the unfairness of that was just, incredible. We had in some states like California where they banned in-person church, but they allowed strip clubs to still operate. So I have a friend, Pastor Rob, out in the LA area, and he has a hilarious video that you can watch where he says, well, he announces to his congregation, we can no longer be open, but today I'm announcing we're converting to becoming a strip club. And they play the music, and he does this elaborate dance taking off his tie. He only takes his tie off, fortunately. But, the idea that we could have a strip club open, but not that. And I think it's really, hair salons, just, the people who are these small businesses that really have to work. And these are hardworking people, and so I think that we really do need to understand that this is a policy, and we can disagree. I understand, we have disagreements among all of us in a republic, in a free country, but really one person, not me, not you, not any of us should be able to make these decisions by ourselves. It's usually give and take. If anybody knows the political process, usually you don't get your way. You have to discuss and persuade other people in the legislature, the public. You've got to get public opinion behind you. But it's really not consistent with the history of our country to have one person decide with no advice from the state legislature. And then when the state legislature gives you their firm legislative advice, to have it completely ignored. So I think we have a real problem where we are now.
Can I chime in on one thing
Sure.
on that? You talk about the one-size-fits-all policy, and there's more people on campus today than there is in our county. So sometimes I think that people lose sight of that and how that one size doesn't fit all.
Aaron Anderkin is with us today. Aaron is the president of Integrated Sign and Graphic, ISG, which is headquartered here in Lexington. Since 1988, ISG has provided industry-leading design, manufacturing, installation, and maintenance of signage, lighting, and architectural elements to construction companies, design firms, and national brands. ISG's work portfolio consists of large venue projects like shopping malls, mixed-use developments, convention centers, and casinos all across the United States. Welcome, Mr. Anderkin.
Thank you, Senator Paul. There we go. Thank you, Senator Paul, for having us today and for your continued advocacy of small business owners and small business interests on Capitol Hill. To build a little bit there on integrated sign and graphic, and to shed some light and context on our experience as the pandemic hit us all in March and April. So we were, at the time, we'd worked tirelessly for a number of years. We've been open for 30 plus years, but we were really gaining a lot of momentum, a lot of traction with projections that 2020 would be our best year yet, that we were going to be able to add to our workforce, invest in new equipment, and really to see a lot of hard work, kind of come to fruition. In April, we had April 2020, unfortunately, we had $4 million roughly of work canceled just right away. That was 80% of our backlog. And if you think about it, in terms of who we supply to, our larger customers are the commercial real estate developers, the landlords, the management companies, who suddenly obviously got much more concerned about their ability to collect rent from their tenants than investing in infrastructure and continuing to develop and reinvest in their assets, and that had an immediate impact on us. We did get creative, very proud of our team and our just, I guess, ability to be versatile, in that we supplemented a lot of the lost revenue in manufacturing PPE. So we were proud to be one of the first in the Central Kentucky area, in particular, to be able to get the protective face shields and sneeze guards and things of that nature to the hospitals, to the senior living centers, and those that at the time were in need. But it was from a small business perspective, it was something that you all have all shared. It was absolutely frightening. from day to day, you didn't know whether you were going to be open. You didn't know what to tell your employees. You know, as a small business leader, one of the things that I take great pride in, as I'm sure you all do, is your ability to communicate with your employees, to be able to tell them whether it's the good, the bad, or the ugly. You want to be able to say, hey, here's what we're up against. The reality was we didn't know. You know, we were waiting just like everybody at 4 o'clock every day to hear, you know, what we had to deal with. You know, the thing about entrepreneurship and owning and running a small business is that to an extent, you are in control of your own destiny. If you put in the hard work, most oftentimes you're going to get rewards. And the idea that element was completely removed, and that you were at someone else's beck and call was frightening. You know, what we are seeing is that, you know, we were down, I think, 35% in revenue in both the third and fourth quarter, so it definitely hit us hard. We weren't able to supplement everything. What we are still concerned about moving forward is that, you know, the drastic amount of government subsidies, and we have been beneficiaries of the PPP loan and are actually very appreciative of that. But we also are afraid that, based upon our kind of market research and what we've analyzed, that the long-term ramifications are going to be significant. Just because there's some consumer confidence right now, you know, at a certain point the government subsidies are not going to fuel the economy. You got to have confidence from those in the private sector willing to invest. And so we want to try to do everything we can to put ourselves in a position to still be successful in that climate. But we are, you know, fearful that it's not over anytime soon. So, but again, we appreciate the opportunity for you to hear us out today, and for certain everything you're doing to advocate for us.
And so where do things stand? You said third and fourth quarter were down. How about the first quarter of this year?
The first quarter of this year was down about 25%. It got a little bit better. And then I think we're going to be down about 25% again, comparing the second quarter of 2021 to the first quarter of 2020.
Thanks. Kaylin Query is the founder and president of Lexington Event Company and Lex Effect Venues, LLC in Lexington. Ms. Query started her first business when she was in high school, and while it didn't have a name at the time, it sparked a passion in her for entertainment, hospitality, and events. Welcome, Ms. Query.
Thank you for having me. Like others, we shut down on March 17th, so Lexington Event Company produces events, conferences, trade shows, festivals, weddings. Pre-pandemic, we did this all over the country. That's not the case right now. We're hoping soon to get back to that. And then Lex Effect Venues owns and operates 4 venues in Central Kentucky, so folks rent those spaces to host events. Similar to you, the hospitality industry, we were shut down on March 17th with no real direction on when or what or how. And similar to Dawn, I told our clients and our staff, it's just going to be a couple weeks. And then a couple weeks was a couple months. And then after 6 months, I stopped saying when we were going to reopen. And clients would call and I said, I don't have an answer. I dreaded the 4 o'clock calls. I would turn my phone off so I didn't get all the notifications. My industry doesn't have an association in Kentucky, so I currently serve as the Small Business Policy Council Chair for the State Chamber, and I relied heavy on them to help navigate some of the noise with, you know, what was a mandate, what was a recommendation, what has changed, where do we find the information, how do we interpret it. I'm not an attorney, I don't want to be responsible for that. And they were a great advocate and a great source, you know, resource for us, but a lot of confusion. And, you know, we want to be safe. I certainly don't want to be a super spreader. I don't want to get fined. I don't want to get shut down. I've not lost quite as much as him, but between our companies, we've lost over $400,000 and counting. You know, and the residual effect will be around for several years. So, you know, we're trying to navigate this. We did not reopen until July 1. Events were not allowed. Everybody kept saying, well, sell gift cards. It's like, well, I rent one of the venues for $5,000 on a Saturday. How do I gift card that? I would love to do carry out or curbside. I have nothing to sell. I give you a chair, you got to bring it back though. So, we were kind of stuck. We had nothing to do, except watch the news. So we navigated and we adjusted and we figured it out. We reopened July 1 with very few staff. Most of them were on unemployment. We did get a PPP loan, so we were able to bring some of our folks back. But as soon as we got them back up and running, we were shut down again in the winter. So just as we're telling our clients we're good to come back, we said, just kidding, stay home. We'll see you maybe in April. I do think people are ready to be out. They're ready to be back. We do have a hard time with mandates and recommendations because everyone has different information. So when they come to the events, we're responsible for regulating this. And outside of me physically putting a mask on some people, it's just not going to happen. So we're in a tough spot of what's required and what's not, and everyone has different information, and we provide copies of the mandates, but then they provide me some website they found with something different, and I get threatened with lawsuits daily at this point, which is a lot less scary now than it was in March of 20.
And do you own a venue or just book venues?
I own one, and then I manage 3 others.
Okay. And the one you own, how many people? It's indoors?
It is.
And how many people can it hold?
Pre-COVID, 550 seated, 750 cocktail.
And what are you allowed to do now?
Currently 350. With spacing and the capacity, so venues can have 60% capacity. So with spacing and distancing, and food has to be staff served, not self-served. Social distancing. Then you've got to have room for all the stuff, and then people. You have to have room for them as well.
Right.
So
Has anybody showed you any science that staff serve makes a difference between self-serve?
no.
Someone just decided these things.
Right.
It's just popped out of their head and said, well, we'll get less of it if we do this.
Yeah.
And there might be some logic, but there's no science or studies to prove it. So, and what about outdoor venues? What are the rules on outdoor venues?
100% capacity outside, as long as it's as long as there's one wall open. So if it's a tent, you leave one side off. If it's a barn, you leave the doors open.
What I love about the outdoor dining versus indoor dining is that you can be in a tent and you can have all these people crowded in a tent with no ventilation, but not in the restaurant where they actually have ventilation. The ventilation probably does help reduce the risk of it, but in a tent there's no ventilation at all. Everybody's just breathing into the tent, But did you want to add anything else?
Just similar to what everyone said, we have workforce issues. We're now dealing with threats of lawsuits, on multiple sides. We've got potential for taxes that are going to hurt small business and additional mandates that are going to hurt small business. So, we appreciate you taking the time to hear from us and for advocating on behalf of small business. We've got to get back to whatever normal is going to look like.
And so the difficulty we have right now is you have all these mandates by the governor, probably hundreds of mandates that he's issued. But then you have the law that the state legislature passed that says that his edicts expire after 30 days. That is the law of Kentucky. And yet we have one single judge that is staying the entire state legislature. And this should give us pause to think about it, that we would have one person in the judiciary stop all of the elected officials. I mean, we have 100 representatives, we have 38 senators, they've all been elected by all the people of Kentucky. They came together, and I think nearly 3/4 of them voted to say that emergency orders should end without the consent of the legislature, which to me I think sounds pretty reasonable, that one person shouldn't decide that we would disperse that power and have checks and balances. But now it goes before the Kentucky Supreme Court. Alan, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the court case and what's going on since you're a part of that?
Well, the Pacific Loop Foundation reached out to 3 of us 3 months ago, and 10 minutes ago from Goodwood Brewery. He has locations in Jefferson County, Fayette County, Franklin County, and then there's Minnie Hawkins. She's got a location in Georgetown, Kentucky, and there's Dundee Tavern in Louisville, Kentucky. And when they reached out to us about filing a lawsuit against the state of Kentucky and Governor Beshear about unconstitutional lockdowns on businesses, not just restaurant businesses, businesses as a whole in Kentucky. they've had some success. We actually, the judge Dr. Paul's referring to is Judge Shepard in Franklin County. He basically sided with the governor about the mandates. Once the General Assembly convened and put new laws on the book, when that went forward, the judge, I'm not a political scholar like, or excuse me, a legal scholar like you or people in the room, but basically the judge sided with the governor and basically stopped the General Assembly from creating new laws to limit the governor's powers. And we as citizens voted them in. We did. So specifically, Legal Foundation found loopholes basically in what was going on with the governor of, of Judge Shepard in Franklin County, and then Trendy's, a restaurant in Georgetown, Kentucky, they launched, well, basically our lawsuit was launched in Scott County. And there was a Judge Privet who basically overruled to a point of what Judge Shepard was doing in Franklin County. So we had 4 days of freedom. The Court of Appeals heard it. It was automatically forced the Court of Appeals. The goal of the Pacific Legal Foundation and us was to get it from the state Supreme Court, because with these new laws, the thinking is, how could you, as a state Supreme Court, not go by the law? And I've been told, as recently as last week, the state Supreme Court does not go by the law all the time, which, okay, we got that going on too. But the Court of Appeals sided with the governor, saying that it was irreparable harm to the governor to let our businesses open up. Okay. Now, and also about the virus and related to the general public, we said Kentucky, which there's no science. So the irreparable harm they're speaking of do not include the small businesses, the harm we've been through. So it stands right now, the oral arguments are May 25th, opening arguments are May 25th, and then June 2nd goes before the state Supreme Court.
Right. And the thing is while you can't directly lobby the Supreme Court, it is an elected position, and we do get a chance to vote on these things, and so I think we should watch carefully what happens. The interesting thing is I don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, emergency powers, most of us could agree to some basic emergency powers for the governor. When they passed the law, they gave him these powers. The state legislature gave the governor these powers in the 1990s. It was for the things that most of us would probably agree to. A tornado hits the middle of Lexington. The National Guard is called to bring in food, water, blankets. We set up tents. We set up places for people to sleep in a school or a gymnasium. We would all agree to that. Nobody has a problem with that. But if you're going to tell Mr. Hanks that he can only have 25% of the people in his restaurant for a year, that's not an emergency, that's a policy, that's a law, that's an edict that should have to go through the normal processes of law. So I don't know how anybody can imagine that one person could have that power. Part of the problem with having that power for so long is that when our legislatures go out of session, they cannot call themselves back into session. So from March of last year all the way till January, there was no way they could do anything. And so the governor basically ignored every plea from the legislature. They came back in, passed the law, and then he immediately sued the legislature to say he wasn't going to obey the law of the land. This is a very, very dangerous precedent if it is enforced by the courts, that we would allow one person to overturn the state legislature of 138 people. The will of 138 people that represent 5 million people would be overturned by a court or by one individual. And I've said this, and I'll say this again, I don't care whether the governor would be a Republican or a Democrat. I would have exactly the same position. We cannot have anybody of any party have unlimited power. It goes against everything historically that our country stands for in the division and the checks and balances on power. What are the current restrictions for how many people can be in the restaurant?
It's at the state of Kentucky, yes, right now it's 50%. Outside is unlimited. And of course, the world famous 1,000 people or less, no mask. So, I'm sorry, I was talking to you guys earlier about Churchill Downs this past Saturday.
What's 1,000 people or less, no mask? What's that?
Yes.
No, what's the rule? I don't understand what the rule is.
If you have 1,000 people or less, you don't have to have a mask.
No mask.
If you have 1,000 people or more, you have to
have a
mask
mask
at all times. So if you're seated at your table or you're eating or drinking, you don't have to wear a mask. Any other time you're supposed to wear it, unless you have 1,000 people or less. or unless you're indoors and that rule changes. It also depends on where you are, what county you're in, or you just decide yourself. It just depends on the day.
Where do we stand, Dawn, with the schools as far as getting back to school? I mean, do you know, like in Lexington, how much is in person versus how much is virtual?
I don't know in Lexington, but I mean, we had to pass, speaking of the state legislators, I mean, it was so bad that we had to have legislation passed even to get our largest school district, Jefferson County, back in school 2 days a week. And they had the opportunity to pass with their Board of Education to go back even more than that, and turned it down, said no. So they're about the only district that I know here in the state of Kentucky that's in 2 days. Most are in 4, and then of course there is still virtually. Ironically, about the mask, the outdoors, the Derby, and all of that fun stuff was that prior to the Derby and Mayor Fisher and Governor Beshear and the Derby, Jefferson County kids couldn't even go out on the playground without wearing a mask. So
And
I
yet
think that
50,000 people could come to the Derby, right?
in the same county, So that's been kind of crazy. Most of our schools are back in 4 days. The 5th day is probably about 50% hit, whether they are there or not.
And I think it's important to put this in perspective if we were actually to look at the science of what's going on or the statistics of what is going on. 85% of people over 65 have been vaccinated. 85% of the country over 65 has been vaccinated. A third of the country has gotten the disease and has natural infection. Some of them have been vaccinated too. Some of them have gotten the disease and been vaccinated. But we have huge numbers. If you want a vaccine in our state, you can get it. There's really no limitations now. Pretty much anybody can get it. I don't know if children are under certain age are allowed to get it because it hasn't gotten approval for that. But the vaccine is out there. The numbers, if you look at daily incidents, have gone through the peak in January and are down low. The deaths went through the peak in January and are down low. There's no real evidence that we should still be doing this. And even states that have had significant lockdowns, or even New York's going to be ahead of us in opening up. So when the governor says that we need to vaccinate 2.5 million people, the burden should be on the governor to say why that number? Where's the scientific proof that we need that? Where's the evidence that we still have a great problem in Kentucky? Everything about Kentucky says that we don't necessarily have that problem. And much of the reason we don't, I think, is because we're a rural state, and the rural states have largely done better than the urban states. But we're stuck in sort of this place. But I think the biggest thing is it can't be one person's opinion. We really need to be in a democratic republic, multiplicity of opinions that come together and somehow consensus forms government. And that's what we have to, I think, truly be concerned with. One of the things about schools that I think puts it in perspective is that more children have died from suicide than from COVID. Can you imagine? And suicides are up.
That suicides are definitely up, and that is one of the things I don't like about let them play or let them learn, is because parents, have reached out to me, and I don't say I don't like it. I don't mean it like that, but it's tough.
You've had to hear
it's
this.
tough.
Yeah.
You hear. I grew up on a farm, so in a small rural community about an hour away. So I understand the limitations that often rural Kentucky and rural America have, and it's just incredible. And I don't know what the numbers are now, but you were speaking of people not logged on. I do know that Jefferson County back in the fall was estimated between 5,000 and 10,000 that had never logged on. I know that the Kentucky Department of Education on their website estimate between 50 and 100,000 that don't have internet. I know when we went virtual here in Fayette County, 12,000 kids didn't have a Chromebook, and we have sent these kids on their way in homes that maybe aren't as good as they need to be, with families that don't have jobs or have made tough decisions, and mom's not working because she really is trying, or maybe mom's by herself and grandma's helping. The information just continues and continues.
And we did all this without an iota of evidence of significant spread in the schools. Not one study. In fact, every study showing the opposite. And we also have the experiment in all of our communities of private schools that have stayed open and not had any kind of super spreading event or any kind of surge in the community among the students or the teachers.
And our surrounding states have been in, much like, I mean, I think Indiana has been in since August. I mean, they've had a couple, quirks and things that they've had to do, but Tennessee's been in. I mean, Virginia, West Virginia, they've all been in at least 3 times, if not 4 times more than Kentucky. And we're still struggling to get in.
I think we're going to wind up here pretty soon. Does anybody else have any subject or statement you'd like to finish up with before we come draw things to a close?
I think we need to say that I'm not envious of anybody that had to make any of these decisions. I think there's a lot of tough choices that had to be made, not a lot of information, a lot of changing information. I in no way envy having to make those choices, but I think making those choices and providing some evidence to support it and maybe considering, options or just maybe sticking with something and letting us all know. But we appreciate, I think I can speak for everyone when I say we appreciate those who are trying to get us safely reopened and get things back in focus. It's got to be a tough job to be making these choices and figuring out mandates and PPP and EIDL. So, I am very appreciative of those who are working like you to get things reopened and to figure this out because it's got to be a tough job.
I think you've hit the nail on the head about tough decisions, because when you think about it, the way a free society is set up is like if you're accused of a crime, you're presumed to be innocent. So you go before the court, and it's the burden of the government to prove that you're guilty. You don't have to prove that you're innocent because you're assumed to be innocent. It's the same way in a free society. You're assumed to have your liberty, and if government wants to take of your liberty, it's their burden to prove why. And it should be a big and a steep burden to say to a business person, we're going to dictate what you can, or to say to someone who's in convention planning and event planning that we're going to do this. It is their burden. And if it's going to be extraordinary to take away your freedom to make these decisions with the people you contract with, it has to be extraordinary. There has to be scientific evidence, there has to be proof of it, but there also should be the imprimatur or the approval of the legislature. No one person should get to dictate to you how to run your business or how many people can be in your store or what your clients can do. Because here's the danger. When you let one person decide, that person could make a mistake. Now, the whole legislature could make a mistake, but at least now you've had a debate amongst a lot of people, and you have this give and take and checks and balances. But this has sort of been the argument against the centralization of power all the way down to one person. It's sort of why we fought the revolution. We didn't like having a king. We wanted to have that power dispersed so there would be debate. So I think this is an issue of our time. Not only is it devastating to your individual businesses, but this is a real issue of whether or not you're presumed to be free and the government has a burden to prove why they want to take your liberty, or if you can have some public health person just write a note and say, go arrest them. I mean, we have lived through the last year where the police were sent to churches to take down license plates. I think it's also important to say it's not that I don't care about safety. If you asked me in March of last year, if you were 85, should you go sit in a church for 2 hours? I'd say I'd advise against doing it. So, I mean, there is advice, and I think most people, I tend to think in a free society, in our society, people are smart enough to take advice from experts, filter through it, and make a decision. But also, if you ask me if you were 25 years old and wanted to go sit in a church for 2 hours last March, I'd have probably said, your risks are much less. You'll have some risks you could get sick, but the chance of dying is 1 in a million. So I think people could take that advice, and this would be advice that we give to people. But there's a difference between persuasion and edict, and it isn't one size fits all. We're not the same. I mean, one of the things that, because we've had this sort of monolithic advice that we failed to tell people, and I tell people everywhere I go, there is something that can save your life, and nobody's telling you this. If you get COVID, particularly if you get COVID and you're overweight, 80% of the people going in the hospital or dying are overweight. So if you get COVID and you're overweight, you need to be much more cautious and careful of your symptoms to look for treatment. But there is a treatment. It's called monoclonal antibodies. President Trump got it, Chris Christie got it, Giuliani got it, but there's a window of time. If you don't get that treatment and you get sicker and sicker and sicker and you go to the hospital and they have to put you on the ventilator, they'll say the monoclonal antibodies don't work, you missed your window. And I don't hear anybody on television telling you that, so you would know that if your mom or your dad got sick and they were getting sicker and beginning to cough, that you got to get them in soon, and you got to advocate to get them monoclonal antibodies. The doctor has to make the decision, but I promise you, being an advocate and a family advocate can make a difference. And it's about an 80% reduction in death. In fact, what they're doing for people, if you're living in a house with someone with COVID, let's say it's two elderly people, the woman has it, she's 85, and her husband says, I'm not leaving, I'm her only hope, and I'm going to stay with her. They can actually give the monoclonal antibodies to him too before he gets it. And sometimes it either prevents them from getting it or they get an incredibly mild case. And instead, we're insist on making a 2-year-old wear a mask on a plane, and making a young kid with autism who's 7 or 8 put a mask on a plane and holding them down and kick them off planes. Instead of somebody saying there are ways we can save your life, through medication, there are reasonable things you can do if you're at risk to avoid this disease. And to let people know the reasonable and obvious evidence that we're getting beyond this, that everything shows that we are getting beyond the part of this, and hopefully we'll be getting beyond it soon. I want to thank you all for participating. We wish you the best of luck in your business. I tell people that I think our job in government is to make it easier for you to succeed in business. I can't help you with the business, but I can try to help keep government out of your way. And I think in the last year, we've done nothing but put obstacles in the way of your business. We've had family businesses, restaurants run for 60, 80 years, go out of business, but gone through several generations of family members, and then all of a sudden it's gone. Something had been built up for generations. That's very sad. So I hope we will see some sense very, very soon. I hope the Supreme Court will look at this of Kentucky and say, we cannot,